In this video, I will be talking about how I got from my original project, which was the tile map procedural generation, to the next part of my project, which was the side-scrolling roguelike. The biggest difference between the two, well, there's two big differences actually. The first one is that obviously the camera's perspective, where in the tile map it was top down, and this is what I was planning on doing from the beginning. However, though, as I slowly came to realize, is that having a top-down is actually a lot more work because there's a lot more hidden colliders. You need the map to be entirely interactable. You can't just have blanked out pieces. And this is one of the reasons why I decided against continuing doing this, is because I had vastly overestimated how much I could get done in the time that I had. Unfortunately, this put me in quite an awkward position because instead of being able to just focus on this project right from the beginning, I had to change it around about halfway through. And this is when I started to look for inspiration from different things, such as Risk of Rain, Shovel Knight, and so on. I knew that I wanted to do something side-scrolling at that point because I could see in my head that there'd be a lot less background work that I'd have to put into it, which meant that I could spend more time focusing on the AI and the character controller, which is what is actually making the game fun for the player. If I was to go back and do this all again, I'd probably still go down the same route as well. Because even though there was a huge amount of pressure from changing it, it allowed me to focus on the things that I really wanted to achieve with this project, instead of focusing on something that would have just made it work. And I don't think that would have been as enjoyable, and nor would have I learnt from it as such. The general steps for me to get from the actual midpoint to where I was, though, however, was quite strange because, as I was saying, I needed to take inspiration from these games, but I didn't want to lose the research I'd already done into the top-down games. This led me for a little while to feel like I should have kept down with the top-down, but after playing Risk of Rain, I realized that it would be very easy to incorporate some of the mechanics that I had touched on and put them into the side-scrolling. The procedure generation, obviously, I lost because there was no way for me to replicate it into a side-scrolling fashion from the code that I'd written. But the actual code that I wrote for it was extremely well made for what it was, I believe. As it was quite a big part of my project, it took me about 2 weeks to create. The actual process for creating it was very, very well ironed out, and it was the same for all of my code. Is what I would do is I would get a notebook or something, and I would just simply write down just a list of things that it needed to accomplish and how it would accomplish them in a form of a flowchart. What this allowed me to do is focus on bit by bit getting each bit to work, and it also allowed me to have a start and a finish. So, for example, for my procedure generation map, the first thing it needed to do was create 50 tiles. Completed that. Next thing it needs to do is to change some of those tiles. After I'd done that, it needs to then clean them all up and add in more tiles to give the world more diversity. If you look through my code, you can see this in practice quite a lot, especially with the bigger bits of code, for example, the character controller, which I will get up for you in a second. Sorry, this computer's a little bit slow today. You open up the character movement. You can see, mainly due to the messy nature of the code, but also to see how things have almost evolved. So, for example, the movement is here. This was one of the first things I did, but it's been added to, and that's one of my biggest regrets from this project. Is that I didn't keep taking. I didn't save multiple variations of it so I could see my code evolve. Instead, I coded one thing and then went straight onto the other. And this kind of fell back on me. For example, for now showing it off, it's very hard to try and explain how I got here without really going into a lot of detail, which isn't what I wanted to do. I just wanted to be able to present it. But as I was saying, I can see, and I hope you can as well, that how it's sort of been evolved onwards. So, for example, like this was all done first, so I could have it working, and then I moved into the creation of the bullets, and this all started to work, and then I kept on going. There's a lot more of this in my books, which I'll be handing in as well. So to get to the point of the game, which it is now, There's a few things I had to do. I just died there. That was strange. So the first thing I did was I made the character and I got it all working. I then had a few people playtest it and tell me their thoughts on it, and the majority of people were saying that the camera's good, the character feels fluent, but they needed enemies. So this is then when I went on to the AI. The AI was a bit of a weird one to really try and perfect to a player's perfections, and I started off just with the really simplistic ones and carried on, and I had people playtest them so I could change them around. The biggest complaint I got was about the totem pole in it. People were saying it was way too easy, and as I touched on in my AI code video, is that one of the things I did was I upped its damage. And although this was a very lazy way of increasing a difficulty curve, it works because the player is now scared of being hit by that. For my actual game choices, you'll see that when you load it up, there is no indication of what the enemies do. There's no documentation of it either, unless you actually look through the code. I decided to do it this way because when you go into an actual roguelike, there is no instructions. There is no, oh, you have to work out to kill this enemy, you have to follow these steps. You die, and then you try a new strategy, and then you die again, and you keep on going until finally you can do it. The randomness of the items and the levels is a big influence on this as well, because you can't rely on getting a certain upgrade. Because if you all of a sudden if you are relying on say the diagonal shot, then when you don't have it, you're going to be screwed on levels like this. I really wish I'd spent some more time thinking about how I could encourage the player to keep on moving. Because as it is, I could just stand here forever and I'd never die. Whereas in some games, um, especially for example, Super Mario, which I touched on very briefly in my thing, is that there's a timer, and as that ticks down, and if you reach 0, then you lose. Whereas in this, there's nothing, and in Risk of Rain, as the longer you wait, the harder the game gets. So there's an incentive to try and get through it as quickly as possible. Overall, I think the project was quite a success, and I'm really happy with the steps I took from the very beginning to get to here. Um, yeah, I will see you in the next video.